How it started, I wanted to be a journalist. I used to apply to every advertisement I saw. My parents used to buy the Observer. I used to look at the job pages in the Observer, and in there was an advertisement for an experienced freelance fashion journalist. Okay. And this was at the time when I was waiting for my A-level results, or just before I did my A-levels, I'm not sure. Anyway, they wrote back, because I wrote a really cheeky letter, and they wrote back and said, well, we're not actually what we want, but your letter made everyone laugh in the office. Would you like to write a column about teenage life in London as a freelance? So I said yes, and I did. That's when I worked number one. I worked on that.
Did you get to meet the cover star?
I never met Cliff Richard, no. I met, in fact, Cliff Richard sort of disappeared from sight almost then. I met the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Hollies, Kinks.
David Bowie?
No, that was later, David Bowie. All of those Liverpool bands, the Undertakers, Billy J. Kramer, Jerry and the Pacemakers. I met PJ Proby, Jim Smith, Call My Jim, all my friends do. It was quite interesting. And I've worked for a very good chief site. The standards were very good. It might surprise you with something like Jackie, but the standards were very good about grammar. And I remember writing a story which I thought was rather good. The first one I wrote, which was about Adam Faith, and he gave it back to me and told me it was pompous. And he gave me a piece of advice for writing, which is true of any writing that you're doing, and that is, this is not old money, never use a half a crown word laddie when a sixpenny word will do, which isn't. And I was at the graduations ceremonies last week. I was sitting with a group of academics talking about language, and I reminded them of that. I reminded them, they're quite often guilty of using half a crown words, but it's true. Always, the greatest writing is always simple.
So, with that in mind, what about text speak? Where do you stand on text speak?
I don't use it.
Do you think it's actually going to come in?
Of course it will. Yeah, but I don't have to use it. I just can't bring myself to do it. And my wife, who has been using an iPad for a year, and had never used a mobile phone before, and now text. My grandchildren are astonished, by the way. They're suddenly starting to get texts from Nan. They couldn't understand. She refuses to compromise. She spells everything out. She punctuates it properly. Which I do. I can't do anything else. But it's already in the language. It's already in the language. And my grandchildren, for instance, who now would never think of using email. Email is dead as far as they're concerned. They use text and Twitter. My granddaughter in particular uses Twitter a lot. They use this language all the time.
I was interested in that you said you'd lived in Surrey.
Yes.
And I wondered if you'd had anything to do with IPC magazines.
No, not really. I freelanced for them. I freelanced for, it was part of IPC, I think, a very good pop magazine in the 60s called Rave.
Oh, yes.
Which was a very upmarket pop magazine, black and white. And the same, it was Nunes, which I think was part of IPC. They also did a very smart women's magazine called Nova.
Yes.
And Rave was exactly the same as Nova, only black and white. Unfortunately, I haven't got any copies of it. I wish I had.
Well, Nova went under.
It did, eventually, but it was a kind of
74
benchmark magazine, wasn't it, in the 60s?
Yes.
Always black and white, fantastic pictures. And I was doing a feature a month for Rave when I came back to London.
Okay. Did you find it more useful moving into politics from a background of working?
Well, I think what the effect working for Jackie had on me was not to do with the working on Jackie, but moving to Dundee, where it's published. And I'd always lived in a comfortable south in Surrey, and suddenly I found myself living in the old Jute Mill area of Dundee. Because Dundee was based on the 3 J's: jute, jam, and journalism. So there's a big jute industry. Keeler's Marmalade and jam, and DC Thompson's was the journalism, and they were the 3 big employers in the city. But I think there was only one jute mill left by the time I got there. But I lived in a tenement block in the middle of a fairly impoverished working class area, and I was already sort of moving towards the left because I'd done history at A-level, but it really changed me as far as my views on politics were concerned.
So, going back to politics a little bit, moving from the left to the Green Party, what?
Well, the Green Party is on the left.
Yeah, but
It's on the left. If you look at... well, let me tell you how I got to the Green Party.
Yeah, please.
I came out to London. I ended up working for local government magazines for 15 years. All the people I worked with there were left-wing. In fact, of the people I worked with on a magazine called Municipal Journal, and another one called Municipal Engineering, 1, 2, 3, 4 eventually moved to the Morning Star, which is a CP newspaper, and 2 of them went to work on Tribune, which is a left-wing Labour Party newspaper, which I used to write for very occasionally as a freelance. And those people and those magazines, surprisingly, were very left-wing. And I got involved in the National Union of Journalists there too. So, and I was a member of the Labour Party for many years, but I left the Labour Party. I was disillusioned in 1997 when they had a huge majority, more than 180 I think it was, and they decided to follow the budget that the previous Tory government had put in. And I just didn't feel they did enough. I left in 2000. As I'd always been involved somewhere, I looked at the manifestos for the Green Party. I'd written about environmental issues, by the way, since about 1970.
Yeah.
The Green Party and the Lib Dems, and decided that the Green Party manifesto was a bit like an old-fashioned Labour Party manifesto, really, except, of course, there was a bigger green emphasis on it. But if you look at the Green Party manifesto on things like the distribution of wealth and equalities, it is very, very strong indeed.
Both Gordon and I are volunteers.
Yeah.
How do you you look at volunteers in the workplace, particularly in a way of helping people in recovery?
Well, I think it's very useful. I think there's several layers to volunteering. I think volunteers play a really important role, and particularly in something like this where you will have experienced what the people you're working with are going through, which many paid workers without that experience can't imagine or understand properly. So I think that's really important. Where I have a problem with volunteering is where some politicians might see it as a substitute for services. So I think the balance between maintaining proper public services but involving volunteers is one that we need to watch very carefully. I fear that because the money that's being cut is not coming back, the way we do things in the future might be different, and we have to look at that very, very carefully. I'm not sure that we will go back to the way we were in terms of funding for local government and public services. And the good side of that, if there is one, is that people are more prepared to look at different ways of doing things than they are when, in times of plenty, somebody comes up with a good idea and says, "Oh no, we don't need to do that." Where we live now, there might be other ways of doing things, but we do need to preserve services. But I think volunteers have a huge part to play in the sort of work that Brighton Housing Trust does, and it's self-evident from the trust in its work how successful it is.
Do you maybe see a role for volunteers, especially people that have gone through recovery, in working with staff training for flight?
Yeah, I do, yes, I think so, yeah. And I think that's really important. I think, not just for volunteers, I think all service users, and there is I hope, a pattern of that emerging in some places. Service users and those who experience the service should be involved in constructing services.